The world did not expect Namibia to redefine the meaning of sovereignty, and certainly not through a leader who had spent years being dismissed as too disciplined, too technical, or too uncompromising. Yet the person responsible for one of the most dramatic political shifts in modern playing African history is a woman who many believed would simply maintain the status quo. Her name is Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, and in a matter of weeks, she has turned her nation into the most closely watched political experiment in the global South. Her rise was not dramatic, but her leadership is. And nothing displayed that more clearly than her first decisive act as president, expelling more than 500 U.S. citizens from Namibia for immigration violations. No warnings, no courtesy meetings, no back-channel negotiations. It was the kind of decision African governments had always avoided, fearing economic consequences or diplomatic retaliation. But Nandi-Ndaitwah did not blink. She simply said, "The law applies to everyone. It starts now," and moved on to her next task. The world was stunned. Namibia wasn't. Her presidency did not begin with a speech. There was no ceremonial parade, no long list of thank yous, no poetic introduction to a new era. On her first day in office, she walked into the cabinet room quiet, precise, unreadable even to those who had known her longest. The ministers were prepared for optimistic messaging, the usual blend of hope and political theater. Instead, she gave them 7 minutes that none of them would forget. The era of comfort is over. The era of silence is over. What we deliver matters. What we delay ends here. From now on, it is results or resignation. That was it. No metaphors. No friendly transitions. Just a new operating system forced into existence. This was not political performance. This was an intentional shift of national psychology. For decades, Namibia, like many African nations, had been governed through thick layers of bureaucracy that slowed progress to a crawl. Offices existed without function. Ministries multiplied without purpose. Departments were created to reward allies, not to serve citizens. Budgets leaked into ceremonial projects, international conferences, reputation-building forums, anything but the work people had actually elected leaders to do. Nandi-Ndaitwah understood that corruption is only half the problem. The real enemy is a system bloated enough to hide failure behind paper trails and endless procedures. So she cut into it with surgical precision. In her first week, she reduced the government from 21 ministries to 14. It was the most aggressive restructuring Namibia had seen since independence. Departments were merged overnight. Entire offices were dissolved. Directors arrived at work to discover their portfolios had been absorbed into new administrative blocks. Others found that the positions they had occupied for decades no longer existed. Panic spread across the political class not because of job losses, but because the old networks that thrived in the shadows were suddenly exposed to daylight. She didn't just shrink government. She eliminated the places where inefficiency, nepotism, and political favoritism had comfortably lived for years. Her explanation was simple. The state is not an archive of positions, it is a tool. If a tool doesn't work, you change it. This was the tone she set for her leadership: cold, direct, and unapologetically focused on function over tradition. And for citizens who had grown tired of ministries that announced plans but delivered nothing, this was the proof they had been waiting for. A leader who treated government like a responsibility, not an inheritance. But dismantling a failing system was only her first step. Her true mission was to build something new, an administration designed for speed, precision, and national purpose. She believed that development would not come from more ministries, more meetings, or more partnerships that only benefited donors. It would come from reviving the productive engine of the nation itself. Days after restructuring the government, she presented a nearly $4.7 billion investment strategy, a plan that she described not as a recovery fund, but as an economic reset. Its goal was clear: create 250,000 jobs by 2029, not as a political promise, but as a national survival target. What made her plan stand out was not the size of the investment, but the purity of its focus. The money would not be spent on international forums. not on symbolic initiatives, not on capacity-building workshops that end with glossy reports, but no roads, no factories, and no opportunities. Instead, her strategy pointed in only 3 directions: infrastructure, manufacturing, and energy. For her, infrastructure was not just about highways. It was about reconnecting rural Namibia to the rest of the country. She insisted on building routes that linked forgotten villages, creating pathways where the state had previously been absent. These roads, she argued, would not just transport goods, they would transport dignity, access, investment, and unity. When people can travel, they can participate. When they can participate, they can grow. Her next priority was local manufacturing. Namibia has long exported raw materials while importing finished products, a model she described as colonial economics in modern clothing. She vowed to reverse that logic. Under her direction, the state began establishing industrial zones where Namibian businesses could process minerals, refine agricultural products, and manufacture essential goods for the domestic and regional market. The goal was simple: keep value within Namibia instead of exporting wealth to foreign factories. But it was her energy vision that attracted the most global attention. While other African leaders doubled down on oil as the future, Nandi-Ndaitwah pushed a dual strategy: extract oil to fund immediate needs, but rapidly build a renewable energy sector that could turn Namibia into a global player in green hydrogen and solar power. Namibia has some of the best solar conditions on Earth: land, sun, wind corridors, and she intended to turn them into national power. She saw energy not just as electricity, but as leverage. A nation that controls its energy, she said, controls its destiny. Then came the moment that shook the global oil industry. When offshore oil discoveries were announced, international companies prepared the usual extraction playbook: quick negotiations, multi-decade contracts, and royalty structures that left host countries with scraps. But this time, the script broke. Nandi-Ndaitwah centralized the entire oil and gas sector under her office. Every license, every contract, every legal process. No brokers, no private intermediaries, no political influencers acting as negotiators. It was a complete lockdown of a sector the world expected to dominate. And then she made her boldest decision yet: ordering a feasibility study for a national, Namibian-controlled oil refinery, not a joint venture dominated by foreign companies. Not a multilateral project designed for investor comfort. A refinery operated by Namibians, on Namibian soil, governed by Namibian law. Her principle was non-negotiable. No resource leaves this land without leaving value behind. Industry analysts called it unrealistic. Investors called it aggressive. She called it justice. But sovereignty for her was not just about minerals or energy. It extended to people as well. For years, African citizens living, studying, or working abroad had been deported for minor immigration violations. Meanwhile, foreigners living in African countries often violated visa rules with impunity. Nandi-Ndaitwah ended that double standard instantly. Her government audited visa records across multiple sectors. When they found hundreds of undocumented U.S. citizens, they applied the full force of Namibian law. 500 deportations. No negotiations. No special privileges. Embassies protested. Some warned of strained bilateral relations, but she remained unmoved. Respect is mutual, she said. If Africans can be deported for a form error, then others can follow the same law. What came next was even more controversial. She reopened a historical wound that many preferred to leave buried: the genocide committed by Germany in Namibia in the early 1900s. For decades, Germany had offered symbolic gestures, carefully worded apologies, and limited financial commitments that avoided legal responsibility. Nandi-Ndaitwah rejected all of it. She demanded a formal apology, legal recognition, and meaningful reparations. Not humanitarian aid, not development partnerships, actual reparations. Her stance triggered diplomatic discomfort across Europe, but she stood firm. Nations cannot build futures on unresolved injustice, she said. Reparations are not gifts, they are debts. And that is the thread that ties all her decisions together. Nothing she has done, neither the deportations, nor the economic reforms, nor the oil sector centralization, nor the challenge to European powers, exists in isolation. They are pieces of a single philosophy, a practical, execution-based form of Pan-African sovereignty that rejects dependency and demands self-determination through action, not speeches. To support this transformation, she also moved to strengthen agriculture through national mega-projects aimed at food sovereignty. She created youth training centers, sports infrastructure, and cultural development initiatives, not as decorations, but as investments in identity and unity. Her cabinet is a mix of technocrats, young professionals, women, and community leaders, an intentional break from the old political formula where power was concentrated at the top. Power shared, she often says, is not power weakened. Across the continent, her leadership is sending shockwaves. People are not watching Namibia because of oil or energy or reforms. They are watching because Nandi-Ndaitwah is testing a question that African leaders have avoided for decades. What happens when a country decides to govern itself with full control, full intention, and zero fear? The world is beginning to understand the answer, and the answer is changing the narrative of African possibility.